Remember that they're changing my voice. This video is part 1 of a video series about why I, Jesus, have a problem with conservatism. So first let's look at Collins' dictionary. In Collins' dictionary, it says a conservative is someone who is disposed to preserve existing conditions, institutions, etc., or to restore traditional ones, and to limit change. Now, Republicans, for example, they don't want certain things to be the same, right? For example, if Democrats make a certain change, or if they don't close the border effectively, especially because conservatives wouldn't help them pass a bill to do so, to some degree, then conservatives want to correct that because they want to restore traditional conditions and institutions, etc. And they're disposed, right? They're predisposed, they're disposed to preserve existing conditions. That includes the racial dynamic. Now, some of you might say, well, no. Bear with me. There are many neighborhoods in small racist white towns in America where a lot of the residents there do not want people of color to move in. They do not want people who like to play their music loud to move in, regardless of what color they are, etc. There's a lot of neighborhoods like that. Those people want to conserve the economic dynamic to a large degree to prevent them from moving in. That's called being selfish. Tens of thousands of Americans die of preventable deaths every year because of conservatism. Conservatism is basically an antichrist idea. According to Wikipedia, conservatism is a cultural, social, and political philosophy and ideology which seeks to promote and preserve traditional institutions, customs, and values. So they want to kind of trample on the least of who they think of as their brethren, according to their scale. Okay, because a lot of poor people of color go to their churches, what have you. They want to trample on them because they prioritize conserving cultural, social, and political philosophies and ideologies that are part of the greater system of white supremacy. They seek to promote and preserve traditional institutions, customs, and values, which includes the history of shallow American thinking. Now, before people think that I'm wrong or something, I'd like to zoom in on one of my points that I'm going to be making here. Okay. There are millions of white people in America who believe that the country is racist and have believed it before Black Lives Matter even happened. So before Black Lives Matter even happened, there are millions of white people who believe that the country is racist. They believe that the court system was racist to a large degree, is racist to a large degree, right? So we're talking about their past beliefs. So we'll say they believe that the court system is racist to a large degree. A huge part of why they believe that so much of America is racist is what they have experienced themselves. And when you combine the experiences of millions of people who have witnessed racism in the last 40 years, you get an overwhelming amount of evidence that there is widespread racism. Okay. So they believed that the court system was racist to a large degree. They believed that law enforcement, I'm talking about in the last 40 years, mind you. And of course, these people almost across the board still believe that now, right? I mean, how could they not believe? So they believed that the court system was racist to a large degree. They believed that many police officers were racist to a large degree. Judges, prosecutors, other lawyers. They believed that there was a lot of fraternities and social clubs that were racist to a large degree. They believed there was a lot of people who support, sporting a Confederate flag that are racist to a large degree. They believe there's a lot of institutions, private school teachers and deans, principals who are racist to a large degree. A lot of organizations, right? Hate groups, prison gangs, groups of friends in the South. They believe that there's a lot of racism in this country. And most of you might say, well, duh. But you don't seem to appreciate that that means that racism is widespread. And that is a form of psychological warfare against people of color in a way that's unforgivable, that should be reflected in the social and political and economic activities of the state. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying that white people should fork over all their money or something, but you have to understand that part first before we discuss what should be done. A huge part of why they believe that so much of America is racist is what they have experienced themselves. And when you combine the experiences of millions of people who have witnessed racism in the last 40 years, you get overwhelming evidence that there is widespread racism. So clearly, conservatives who argue that there isn't are stupid, or are stupid and lying on purpose. Okay, so let's briefly talk about a small portion of the racists who have a lot of power. People in social clubs and country clubs, what have you. Now, I'm not saying everyone who's in a social club or a country club is racist, but a lot of them are, and they have a very white theme, basically across the board. Okay, white or whitewashed, and they uphold values that are designed to favor white people. For example, if you're a fan of basketball, okay, the NBA, then you would look up to the NBA players. If you're a fan of white culture, you tend to look up to white people, if you want to call it that. It tends to favor a process of looking up to white people more often than not. Okay, so in 2023, American private social clubs generated $32.6 billion in direct revenue, supporting 573,000 jobs and $17.4 billion in payroll. Okay, and keep in mind there are better ways to create jobs. Membership fees and dues were significant sources of revenue. Now, this is according to a source that I came across, and certainly it's got to be ballpark at least, right? So they generated $32.6 billion in direct revenue, and a significant source of that direct revenue was in membership fees and dues. So these weren't some guy just happened to go to a country club for lunch or something. Lots of this money has to do with members paying fees and dues. Now, what are they paying fees and dues for? Well, it's a social club. What do you do at a social club? You network. This is one of many ways that white America keeps the money among white people. As they say, it takes money to make money, and whites and Jews have most of the money in America. And it's not what you know, it's who you know. For example, I have me and my two brothers, all three of us have college degrees. One of my brothers has been working in real estate, probably about 15 years plus. Okay, he hasn't sold a house in like 2 years or something. Okay, hasn't sold anything. And my other brother has a computer science degree from University of Michigan, okay, very prestigious college. And he has several certificates and years of experience, and he hasn't had a job in 2 years, and we live in the Silicon Valley, right? Pretty straightforward. And then I've been crippled by the state in a psychological operation with 23 witnesses on record, okay? And no one does anything. I haven't been compensated, not a penny. And I've reported it for years. So we look at my parents. Both my parents are doctors, and both of them were sabotaged by white supremacy. My mom was sabotaged to the point where she didn't practice being a doctor anymore, what have you, because of the white supremacist system. It's a long story. It goes back to Detroit, what have you. My parents met in Michigan. My father, he's been very much sabotaged by the operation against me, but it's also against him because they don't want a black brain surgeon from Africa, from Nigeria, who's a top doctor to be looked up to, so they didn't want him to have lots of money and nice things and so on and so forth, even though he has lots of powerful friends in his network. Even though my was a brain surgeon for like 43 years and met lots of powerful people in his network, he's sabotaged to the extreme. And they scrambled to make sure that he wouldn't have too much power and people wouldn't be looked up to. That's the 5 immediate people in my family. All 5 of them. Not to mention my uncle, who passed away under suspicious circumstances when you consider the psychological operation that's been going on here for years. Okay, he was a lawyer. That's very suspicious. He was a prosecutor. So he passed away at a young, passed away. He was probably maybe like 40 years old, 45 when he passed away. Maybe more than that. No, it probably was more like 50. Okay. So when you look at this thing, it's just like when Martin Luther King's family members died under suspicious circumstances after he was assassinated. There's strong parallels there. And King was killed in 1960. I was born in 1981. And Bob Marley died under suspicious circumstances in 1981. And the Black Panther Party was dissolved in 1982, the year after I was born. Okay, so that COINTELPRO was still continuing when I was here in California, like the main center of COINTELPRO in the 80s. I mean, it's open and shut here. You'd have to be crazy to think that I'm wrong about this. So when you look at this overwhelming amount of evidence, you see that it's a racist system, and conservatives have the nerve to be disposed to preserve existing conditions, institutions, etc., which means preserving the psychological operations and the attitudes and sentiments and behaviors that lead to black people being held down. Now, they're not the only ones who's held down. I said this many, many times. Poor people in general in this country are held down. America has, a hard-on for black people, especially righteous and handsome-looking black people. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about the pretty boys in social clubs. Okay? If they're making lots of money, should you cry a river? I mean, you should be sad about Russell Simmons or Oprah or just a bunch of Freemasons where they make 6 figures. No, they're not very held down, right? They're Judases who aren't very held down. No offense to anyone, these are facts here. And they like to kind of throw themselves in with the victims and try to maintain their edge on behalf of their whitewashed, organizations and on behalf of the white supremacist elite that are upholding their organizations. So pretty straightforward. You should know them right to a T. There's other very key points we're going to get into part 2. Thank you. We're going to get into part 2.